UBC theoretical physicist Ben Tippett has produced a 12-page paper plotting out the precise geometric behavior of a phone booth-shaped time machine that travels in a loop, constantly shifting backwards and forwards through time. Published in the journal Classical and Quantum Gravity, the paper calls its time machine the Traversable Acausal Retrograde Domain in Spacetime, TARDIS, an obvious reference to the phone booth-shaped TARDIS time machine in the long-running British TV series Doctor Who. Scientists have long understood it's possible to build a machine to accelerate our forward travel through time. That's called time dilation, a concept first drawn up by Albert Einstein and later proved by experimentation. The song 39 by Queen guitarist Brian May nicely sums up the phenomenon in its extreme form. In the song, a space traveler voyages at very near the speed of light for what seems to be a year. But when he returns, the Earth has aged 100 years. His friends are dead, and his infant daughter is a centenarian. The trickier prospect with time travel, however, is going into the past. To work, the TARDIS needs to exist within a closed time-like curve, a loop in space-time that keeps returning to the same point in space and time. Theoretical physicists have determined that such a curve is indeed a mathematical possibility. Dr. Ben Tippett is a theoretical physicist and mathematician. He received his Ph.D. from the Math Department at the University of New Brunswick, Canada. He contributes to the Science, Sort of, podcast as the On-Call Canadian. In his spare time, he likes to write papers about superhero physics or zombies, as well as research on black holes, gravity, and gravitational lensing as a cloaking method. He's currently a math and physics instructor at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus. Dr. Ben Tippett.
Oh, hello, Richard. I am so good. Can I start by saying what an honor it is to be here?
Let me ask you the premise here, just so I understand, because
yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with Professor Ronald Mallett from the University of Connecticut and his work on devising a theoretical time machine, and it wouldn't, just to be clear, it wouldn't transport a human back in time or forward in time. It could transport bits of information, so it could be used as an early warning signal, for example. However, Dr. Mallett's inspiration for creating his theoretical time machine was eventually he wanted to go back in time to save his father, who died at a very young age back in 1958. A very touching story. But you're saying that, just to be clear, time travel to the past is possible. We know that traveling to the future by even just nanoseconds is possible. Mm-hmm. But you're also saying traveling to the past is now mathematically feasible. Or not feasible, possible. Possible.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, well, Richard, is it Richard Mallett? Is that his name?
Professor Ronald Mallett. University of Connecticut. Yes,
Professor Ronald Mallett. Yeah, no, I'm familiar with his story, a little bit less his work, but the deal is essentially both he and I and everybody else who's done research on time travel is working within the same mathematical framework, right? So in mathematical models that allow people to travel backwards in time have existed since the 1950s. In my field, in the field of Einstein's curved space-time.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Einstein's best friend, a man named Kurt Gödel, they used to walk to school together. They both worked at Princeton together. Kurt Gödel is a famous logician. It was Einstein's 70th birthday party, and Kurt Gödel presented him with a mathematical way that time travel can happen as a birthday present.
Uh-huh.
So in my field, we've been talking about the possibility since the 1950s. We use this discussion for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's personal. Sometimes we want to go interact with a family member. But in other cases, we're just exploring the possibility. It's about the math. It's about the journal, the inquiry that we're trying to do. And so, fortunately and unfortunately, in our case, in the case that we are mathematically exploring with my TARDIS, it's possible for someone to go back in time, but it's not possible to change the past in any way. And also, I should add a few caveats. I know it's the middle of the night and nobody wants to hear about mathematics, but there's a big distinction between mathematically possible and physically possible in a way that's going to happen tomorrow, right?
Right.
This is kind of mathematically possible in the same way you can say it's mathematically possible to calculate how fast a person would need to jump in order to jump over the moon. You can do the calculation.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you should spend the next 20 years doing squats hoping that it's going to happen.
I think the other example that you were quoted in the National Post saying it's possible that a snake could go to Harvard, but not feasible, not likely.
That's right.
You see, I had always thought that Einstein's general relativity shows you how much I know. General relativity had ruled out time travel to the past, but so that's off the docket. I'm mistaken about that. But you're saying you cannot, if you travel back to the past, you cannot change the past, which would then rule out the grandfather paradox, which was one of the stumbling blocks to traveling back in time. Correct?
Essentially that's right. The rule here, the rule of thumb that the people in my field work with, it's called Novikov's self-consistency condition. And it sounds like a rule imposed by, God looking at the universe from outside, putting down his hammer. The rule says that you can't change the past, even though you can interact with it. Another way of saying it is, if you interact with the past in your future journey through time, then all of those things that you did will have already happened. It's very difficult linguistically to talk about time travel because your future when you travel backwards in time is the same as your past when you interact with your future self. Oh dear, please don't crash your truck drivers who are listening to this.
So, then does that mean, because you can't interact with the past or you can't change the past, does that mean it's not technically, it wouldn't be time travel. You're traveling to a different, almost a parallel universe, a different timeline entirely.
I find that when I'm trying to explain this, the easiest way to do it is to make reference to some movies. So the debate here is which movie is time travel most like mathematically. Lots of people are familiar with the movie Back to the Future, right, where Marty McFly interacts with his past not his past self, his parents in their past, and in doing so either, he starts to fade out of existence when he mucks too much around with the...
Right, that's the grandfather paradox.
That's the grandfather paradox. The resolution of it, Novikov's self-consistency condition, is a lot more like the movie 12 Monkeys, where Brad Pitt remembers as a child being tussled around. He was present when the bad guy with this horrible virus went through the airport, and then as a future person living in the terrible future, he's asked to go back to the past to figure out who this person with the virus is and stop him. And it turns out that the whole kerfuffle he saw at the airport, the thing inspiring him to go back into the past, was essentially his future self. In this case, he interacted with his self, but only in a way that causes the events to unfold in the way they did. You end up with a self-consistent chain of causal events.
Aha, okay. Yeah, that sort of makes sense. I love how you take this out of the realm of mathematics and into the realm of cinema, which is, I wish I had you as a mathematics professor when I was in school. Now, one of the things that you say that is important to understand here is that the idea of dividing space into three dimensions with time in a separate dimension by itself, that's where we got off on the wrong foot. That's a mistake.
Well, yeah. So I definitely said... I definitely spoke about that in the various articles that have been written about me. The technical article on traversable acausal retrograde domains in spacetime is pure mathematics. If one of the listeners wanted to dig it up off the internet, I think you have to pay to access it. Your eyes would definitely fall out because it's full of, I don't want to say technical jargon, but it's full of technical terminology. But one of the big discoveries that Einstein and the other people who worked with him on the theory of relativity back in, 100 years ago, one of the big revolutionary ideas that they came up with was the idea that time wasn't independent of our three spatial dimensions, that they were somehow stuck together. Weird,
right. Sure.
But one big consequence is that the rate that time passes, the simplest consequence of this is that the rate of time that time passes depends on your motion. And you mentioned this before. This is what lets us talk about future time travel. If you're traveling in a rocket down to a distant star and you come back, you might end up much younger than everybody else because less time has passed for you than everybody at home, right?
Exactly.
It's called the twin paradox. That effect, the twin paradox, comes about from the fact that time is stuck to the other dimensions, giving you a four-dimensional system called space-time. Does that start to make a sense? The twin paradox doesn't make any sense formally outside of your arguments, unless you unify space and time together.
Right. Okay. So tell me about this. The TARDIS. And we're all familiar with the TARDIS from Doctor Who, of course. So incidentally, that acronym that you have, was that what TARDIS actually stood for in the Doctor Who series?
In Doctor Who, the acronym TARDIS stands for Time and Relative Dimensions in Space.
Ah, okay.
So they've got some relativity ideas in there, but nobody's quite sure where they came up with that acronym or whether or not it's supposed to mean anything. There's been a lot of retroactive associating meanings to it in the television show. So we wanted to come up with an acronym that spelled out TARDIS, T-A-R-D-I-S, in a way that actually described our time machine.
All right.
Traversable.
Yeah. Tell me more about how this theoretically this would work and what we would experience if we went into this telephone booth shaped time machine.
All right. So here's the tricky business. A few moments ago, we were talking about how space and time are kind of fastened together, right?
Correct.
It turns out that the direction that a person takes through space-time, the direction that they feel in terms of increasing time, it's called the arrow of time. Their local arrow of time is kind of independent of the arrow of time for things around them. And the distinction between the direction of your arrow of time comes about from motion, and it comes about from curvature. So what we have here is I use the curvature of space-time to make it so that the arrow of time for the people inside the box, it starts out going forward in time, just like the people outside, but then it turns. It turns sideways, and then it turns backwards in time, so the people inside the box are moving backwards in time, and then it turns sideways, and it forms a closed loop. So that's
you're moving frontwards and you're moving frontwards and backwards.
First you move frontwards in time, and then you move sideways in time, and then you move backwards in time, and then
you can get out of your own way. So you can get out of your own way.
That's exactly the case. You need to get out of your own way. You don't want to run into yourself as you move. So, this is a lovely picture because the people inside the time machine are going to see something very dramatically different from the people outside the time machine. If you're outside the time machine, you're going to see two versions of the box. Okay?
Right.
And if you can look into the window of the boxes, you'll see that the person in one window will have time moving forward. Let's say the person inside the box has a big wristwatch. And if you're outside the box, you can look at the person inside's wristwatch. And in one box, it will be moving clockwise, forwards in time. And if you look at the other person in the other box, the hands of their watch are going to go backwards in time. And then, if you're inside the box, on the other hand, you only feel time going forwards. You look at your wristwatch, and the hands of the wristwatch are always going clockwise. If you look outside the box, though, what you'll see, because you're going in a circle, is sometimes your area of time is going to align with the arrow of time outside the box, and you will see, say there's a clock tower outside your laboratory, you'll see the hands of that clock tower will turn clockwise, time's going forward. And then you'll see the hands stop, because time's going sideways, and reverse their direction. They'll start going counterclockwise. Time will reverse outside your window for a brief period of time, then stop, and then go in the right direction, over and over and over. And the fun bit here is if you look out your window to the left, you're going to see another box. So you're inside the time machine, you look out the window and you see another time machine. And inside that other time machine is another version of you. And if you look at the hands of the watch, the other person in the other box, their watch is going counterclockwise. Time is going in reverse. Would you like me to spell that out with, like, breakfast analogies?
Sure. I love a good breakfast analogy.
Okay, so let's say you're in your TARDIS, your time machine, right? Time's going in a circle for you. What does that mean? How does that look? You're making breakfast. You take out your cream, you pour it into your coffee, you crack an egg into the pan, it fries, okay?
Got it.
If you look out the window to your doppelganger, the other box, the one that's going in the opposite direction in time, that person's going to be pulling cream out of their coffee. They're going to be taking eggs, putting them in a pan, unfrying them, and putting them back in their eggshells, reassembling the eggs. On the other hand, somebody outside the boxes is going to see two things. They're going to see one box where the person is making breakfast as usual, and the other box, they're going to see somebody disassembling their breakfast, pulling the cream out of their coffee, uncracking their eggs.
This
is fun.
It's an apt illustration, absolutely. Dr. Ben Tippett is with us from the University of British Columbia, and he says mathematically, time travel to the past is possible. This was a 12-page paper. How was it received by? Well, obviously it's a peer-reviewed journal, but we're coming up on a break. But just give me a sense now, before we head into the break, what was sort of the vibe that you're getting from your colleagues in the field?
Well, the reviewers asked me for lots of reviews, but in the end, I did the reviews and it got published. Well, how much time do we have before the break?
Probably 15, 20 seconds, I'm guessing.
Okay. Well, can we take this up after the break?
Absolutely, we can. Absolutely.
Okay,
we should point out, this is Dr. Ben Tippett from the University of British Columbia, and we'll be back with more of our conversation on time travel. Ben, can you travel back? Is it mathematically possible to travel back to a specific time, or would it just be sort of you take what you can get, basically, or could you isolate a particular date and travel back to that date?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We mentioned earlier that the thing about time travel is that mathematically it's possible, but if it's going to happen, among other things you need to build this weird space-time that takes you back. But once you get there, you can't change history. You can affect history in a way that it's already been affected, right? So if, let's say, we could build my TARDIS space-time geometry, curving us backwards in time, propelling us back into the past, my geometry, the one we wrote about in the paper, is a circle in time, because a circle is, well, it's simple. But there are mathematical methods to use this model to build more complicated ones that start and end at any point. So to answer your question, yes, you can use it to go to any point in the past. However, if you weren't already there mucking around with things, then you probably can't take that ride. What's the best way to describe this? It's like, imagine that all of history is a tapestry, okay?
Right.
And your presence, your lifetime is a thread in this tapestry, okay? Now, all the other threads are going up the tapestry, because that's the direction of time. You're allowed to go backwards in time, according to the theory of general relativity. You're allowed somehow, in some circumstances, to twist the direction that your thread lies on this tapestry, bending it backwards in time, moving it back to some time in the far past, ancient Greece or wherever, muck about with things. But then if you were to take a step back, you would have seen that that thread has always traced a big, wide, oval shape back into the past. You can't make the thread do anything that it never did on the tapestry before. In other words, you can't change the past. If you indeed did go back and mess with things, then maybe it's your destiny to do it. But aside from that, I don't know. It's kind of a complicated predestination thing that we're arguing about here, and not whether or not it's possible. Because mathematically, sure, you can use this type of exotic space-time geometry to transport you back anywhere you want to go. The problem is there some historical record of you being there? Did you drop a shoe back there that some archaeologists are going to dig up in a couple of years' time?
Right,
say, oh, look, that's that shoe, only it's been worn down. I just bought it yesterday, right?
Okay.
So if that's the case, certainly go back in time all you want. If that's not the case, there's a pretty strong argument that you never made the journey. Ooh, boy. Well,
we're doing some mental gymnastics here.
We are doing mental gymnastics.
So, again, I go back to Professor Mallet, and one of his stumbling blocks was that you couldn't travel back in time previous to the date that you actually turned on the time machine. So if you turned on the time machine today, in 50 years, the furthest in the past people could travel back would be May 8th, 2017. What are your thoughts on that?
That is a big distinction between the types of time machines, the way we've conceived of time travel. The reason I wanted to publish this paper, you asked how it was received, and the short answer is it was widely ignored by my colleagues, but I want to get back to that in a second.
Oh, dear.
The trick to building this is that I wanted to, in the past, other physicists have come up with ways to use space-time curvature to transport a person into their own past. It's not rare. There's 5 or 6 I can think of different methods for doing so, but all of them involve us saying, well, you can't really. There's something big out in space that has a lot of gravitational pull to it, and it's behaving in such and such a way. Maybe it's rotating. Maybe it's packed with weird exotic matter that's causing space-time to curve in a weird way. But if I make it out to that big system out in space, and then I travel around it in such and such a way, I can end up in my own past. And the time machine you were just referencing is of that sort. The time machine that I'm conceiving of is one where it's just a box. It's just a box that travels back in time, as opposed to a big weird thing out in space that you have to make that starts spinning, and then once you get it up to speed, you can use it to travel back, but only in as far back as the back date where you turned it on.
Right.
Mine lets you travel between any 2 points, but you've got to lay kind of the railroad tracks. I mean, there has to the time machine leaves a trail. It doesn't disappear between when you start off on your journey and where it ends. It's always somewhere. And so if there isn't a history of the other box, the one where you're going backwards in time in it, the other version of the box, if that version of the box isn't sticking around for all the thousands of years, if people haven't been seeing this strange box with a person inside it just waiting to get off, where, time they look in the window and time's been going back for them, and there's a record
pulling cream out of their coffee?
Yeah, that's right, for 2,000 years, then you're probably not going to be able to use it. So in that way, there has to this object has to be in the universe when you start inside and when you get off. But it's a little bit different than these other ones where you start it off and then you can use it kind of as a water slide back in time.
A water slide. It's a challenge talking about it, isn't it?
It certainly is. This is a very mathematical field, and it's also a field that lends itself very strongly to drawing pictures.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
No. You're doing a great job at explaining. I particularly enjoyed the breakfast analogy. What are gravitational waves, and do they have anything to do with the possibility of time travel? Do they enter into this at all?
Oh, gravitational waves are lovely. Oh, I love them so much. The short answer is probably not. The long answer is we'll have to do a calculation. But let me explain. Gravitational waves they're perturbations in space-time. I'll get to what I mean by that in a second. But they travel like a wave through space. So they just move outwards like a light wave or a sound wave would in the air, and
Right.
they pass through us. They can carry a ton of energy, but they have very little effect on the matter in the universe. So the long and the short of it is, you can't generate a time machine with that. I think I'm going to have to talk about space-time curvature at this point, if you'll allow me.
Please
Buckle
do.
up, everybody.
Please do.
Okay, so the deal with general relativity is it talks about intervals. The whole thing is obsessed with intervals. And by intervals, I mean intervals of time, how long a second takes to pass, and
Right.
intervals of space, how far away another object is. Okay?
Got it.
So in old school classical physics, these intervals didn't depend. They were foundational. They were fundamental. They can't change, right? So if there's a rock and it's 30 meters away from you, it's always going to be 30 meters away from you. And if it moves, so it increases to 40 meters away from you, it means that something is moving. The rock's moving or you're moving. Okay?
Got it. Mm-hmm.
In Einstein's theory, the distance intervals and the time intervals are dynamic quantities. And by that I mean they change. Okay? So what you can have in Einstein's theory is that rock that's 30 meters away from you, it's sitting still. And you, in your chair, are sitting still. But the distance between you and that rock might change. It might go from 30 meters to 20 meters, or it might go to 30 meters to 40 meters. Weird, right? Time intervals are the same thing. We used to think that time intervals didn't change. 1 second was 1 second was 1 second. But in Einstein's framework, what happens is, because of curvature in space-time, you can have 1 second on Earth is equivalent to 2 seconds on some faraway, distant world. Or it's equal to, 0.5 seconds if you're up close to a black hole. It's a complicated business that has to do with, but essentially the manifestation of this curvature is that the distances between things, this distance and time intervals, they're dynamic. So if a gravitational wave passes through you, what's going to happen is the distance intervals are going to wave. It's going to go, that rock that's 30 meters away from you, it'll suddenly be 29 meters away from you, and then go back to 30, and then be 31 meters away from you, and go back to 30. That distance interval is going to change periodically as the wave passes through you. Now, it's not meters. It's a tiny amount. Gravitational waves have almost no effect on distances. That's why it was so marvelous last year when the LIGO collaboration in the United States detected gravitational waves that were produced by two black holes colliding billions and billions of years away. But it's so amazing. So they're very much part of Einstein's universe. They're very much a phenomena that Einstein's universe predicted. But boy, measuring them is a real difficulty thing. I think in terms of distance changes, the argument was like if a gravitational wave passes through us, the distance between us and Alpha Centauri will go back and forth, will change on the order of the width of a human hair. I think that was it.
All right. Yeah, that illustrates it beautifully.
Almost undetectable.
Right.
But this is interesting. We were talking about curvature, and so the deal is that different types of material cause different types of curvature.
Right.
So
okay.
Some materials cause, if you have really crazy things, you get gravitational waves, but ordinary materials cause gravity. What we call gravity in Einstein's framework is the effect of this space-time curvature. So the old picture is you can have the sun, and the sun is generating a gravitational field. And in the old Newtonian framework, we said that there was a rope, an imaginary invisible rope between the sun and the earth, and they were pulling each other together. And that's what caused the earth to swing in a big circle, like a hammer thrower with a hammer, in the Olympics, spinning around.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. what Einstein said is, no, it's not like a hammer thrower with a rope. It's more like a kid on a skateboard. Now, keep in mind, Einstein didn't say it's like a kid on a skateboard. I'm saying it's like a kid on a skateboard because skateboards didn't exist.
Right.
Imagine a skate park, okay? If you've ever stood on a skateboard, it's actually pretty difficult to make a skateboard veer to the left or the right. But if you watch kids in a skate park, they're turning quite sharply. They'll make 90-degree turns and they'll make U-turns. And the way they do that is they're banking off the curvature in the skate park. The skating around, they're roller skating around, skateboarding around on the inside of a big rounded pit. And so when they push off the walls will cause them to bank and go into kind of curved trajectories. And so what Einstein's arguing is it's the curvature of space-time that's causing the planets to go in their circular, ellipsoidal trajectories, okay? So the planets are banking off the curvature generated by the sun. And here's the fun bit. Different types of material cause different types of curvature. Normal material, the type of material we're all used to, the type of material our pens and microphones and computers are built out of, our hands are built out of, regular material, even photons, they cause gravitational attraction. They cause things to fall together. They cause a certain type of curvature that we associate with gravitational attraction. So the reason I say that that time travel is mathematically possible but not actually all that probable has to do with the type of curvature required to do it.
Okay.
I built a mathematical model. I came up with an equation describing the curvature required to go backwards in time in this big circle. The curvature required to bend time, the direction of time, into a circle. And then I asked myself, I didn't ask myself, I asked Einstein's equation, what kind of curvature, what kind of material do we need to make this type of curvature? And the equation tells us that this type of curvature is generated by a type of material we've never seen. It's not gravitationally attractive. So there's a word for it in my field, and it's called exotic matter.
Okay.
It's exotic because we've never seen it. In our universe, you take your telescope, all of the matter, all of the light we look at, everything we can detect and interact with doesn't generate the type of curvature you need to go back in time. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but what it means is we've never seen it. And so I have no idea where we can find it. I am not going to bet that we are going to find it anytime soon. So long story short, mathematically possible, but we know exactly what it will take to build one of these time machines. And the short answer is we don't have the stuff to build it.
Is it the exotic matter that you talk about? Are we talking about the energy? Is it energy that's required to bend time, space, or I mean, when you say
it's not quite a matter of what type of energy. It's not a matter of quantity of energy. It's not that we just don't have enough energy. It's the type of energy. We're talking about things that have weird pressure-energy relationships that we've never seen before. We're talking about matter that has negative energy density. We're talking about types of matter that might travel faster than the speed of light. As illegal as that sounds, in high school relativity, when they're teaching people relativity, they say nothing can travel faster than the speed of light.
And nothing can, the other immutable law of nature is I have to take a break. So we'll take a time out.
Break time.
Marie Queenie Lyons, try me. On the other side, more of our conversation on time travel.